Hey folks, Steve here with another Axis Empires Fall of France video. This is going to be part two. We might not get very far into the actual scenario because I'm going to use some time in this video to talk about a couple of things, mostly around Narvik, but also generally to talk about the way amphibious invasions occur in this game, which I think it's important to talk through and make sure I have my understanding correct. Um, so, just to put this in the good order here, firstly, thank you to Mark Hanna. I don't know if I'm saying that name correctly based on the YouTube username. And of course, Max, who's helped in previous videos for confirming that I played this correctly with the rules. All the sort of criteria bits that we had to hit at the end of the previous video does mean we did execute the invasion and conquering of Norway accurately to the rules. So thank you guys for helping me confirm that and helping to understand this whole little situation we have with this particular scenario. It's very, very helpful. Getting a lot of interaction and engagement on these videos is really good. It helps me learn even more so. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So here's the thing: if I were not playing with Narvik, just saying like the east map, which is where Narvik is, uh, if I didn't set up the east map, like, hey, that's it, we're done, right? We took Norway. Handshake, congratulations, we're done. We can spend the next turn getting ready for Case Yellow because we can't declare war on Belgium, Holland, the Low Countries until we have another card that allows us to do that. Unfortunately, we can't. I don't think I can just declare war on them. Somebody can correct me on that, but I don't think I can. So we maybe would have a dead turn. Now, if I decided to include Narvik, that kind of changes up a lot of things. And in fact, it would probably have changed what support markers I used as the Germans. So as we go through this thought exercise, it could be I decide we're going to go ahead and include Narvik for this whole situation, and then I'm going to have to like reverse time a little bit and play some other markers and kind of talk through the impacts of that. Now, fortunately, I have not rolled any dice, right? We didn't have to roll dice to take over Norway. So anything we do here, I can kind of just say, hey, this happened on the German turn, and this is what the situation is going to be. And I feel okay doing that. I don't need to necessarily change anything that I've done for the existing counters on the map. Anything we would change would just be additions, things that we did in addition to what we've already done that kind of help flesh out the situation as it relates to Narvik. Now, was pointed out by Max that this game, does kind of set up the situation, especially in a campaign game, of trying to deal with, hey, getting into Oslo is one thing, Narvik is another, and the Allies have an incentive to get into Narvik. This is similar to World in Flames, which is the thing I can best compare it to, where what usually happens is the reason why you go into Norway as the Germans, at least in Collector's Edition of World in Flames, is that the Commonwealth player will very likely mine the Norwegian coast, which could deprive the Germans of production, which forces the hand of the Germans to invade and take Oslo so that they don't need to worry about the mines. That's kind of how that's represented. Narvik and control of Narvik also governs who gets a particular additional resource. So another impact on production. And for the Axis, production is pretty darn important. Now in this game, handles it just a little bit differently, where Oslo is a strategic hex, which means we have an incentive to grab it just for victory point purposes and to affect our delay DRMs. And then Narvik is a Axis strategic hex, which means that if the Allies take it, so they have an incentive to get into Narvik, that will have a penalty on the Axis. If the Allies never go up and take it in the mid game, it won't matter because the Germans don't technically control it. But at the end of the game, if the Allies never got into Narvik, that will hurt them. Or if the Allies get into Narvik by the end of the game, that will keep the Germans suppressed by a point. So there is a whole reason to do this, and so that all kind of maps. But for the Commonwealth in this game, it does require some investment of resources to go get up into Narvik. Like anything in this game, it's going to require allocation of support markers. Very few British units in Great Britain right now, and to do it is going to cost one of the core that's in Great Britain, ultimately leaving Britain much more susceptible to a mad dash sea lion attempt, because we're using support markers we would otherwise use to either help France or defend Great Britain. And we're allocating ground units that should be for home defense off on this Norwegian adventure. So there is a whole, in terms of solitaire, this is actually really hard to calibrate because it's just a risk. It's a very broad risk decision. Like, here's the pros and cons. There's no perfect right answer necessarily, and I can't trick myself. I can't surprise myself because I'm playing solitaire. So, if anything, it would be to play and just see the mechanics demonstrated here. Um, yeah. So tricky bits here. Tricky bits. Now, here I need to explain kind of how Great Britain would go about getting into Narvik, and why the Germans would need to contest it a certain way to kind of seal off the result, or how we would go about sealing off the result. Um, so at the status as of right now is at the end of the German turn, just having controlled Copenhagen and Oslo, uh, Denmark Norway is conquered, right? So we have conquered it. It is technically no longer an active country. So when we get to the allied Western Allied faction turn this turn, um, anything that would apply around um, actually, no, in fact, that's not true. Um, yeah, give me a second. Just kidding, scratch that. No, I'm right. I had a double check. The conditional event segment occurs before it goes to the Western Allies turn. So when we get to the end, the conditional event for Axis conquering a minor country triggers. So this does a couple of things. Just to point out, I need to explain this before I explain anything else. The ports that are in Norway are not open ports to the Germans unless there is a German unit or detachment marker in the hex, right? Which means that right now, Stavanger, I'm going to butcher that, sorry. That's not really an open port right now. It's just not, because it is to be a proper open port requires us to control that hex in more real terms than it just being part of a conquered minor country. So we need to garrison it with a unit. So by comparison, Oslo is an open port because we have a unit in it. As it relates to Narvik, Narvik is neither an open port to the Germans because, again, we need a unit in there to be an open port in a conquered country. And it's not an open port for the British either. They actually have to try to invade it. So there is no open port for either one of those, just straight up in the hex itself. That's really important for everything else that matters. It's just that state where it's this in between. It's not just a German controlled area and we have full mastery over it, but neither is it friendly to the British because, again, it's now conquered. If it were not conquered, or we had not successfully taken control of both hexes, in theory, if I don't know, somehow we screwed this up and we didn't get control of one of these cities, the Commonwealth could maybe just ship a unit into Narvik and be good to go. In fact, that's kind of how it happens in World in Flames usually is, um, if the turn doesn't end, the allies tend to have the ability to try to stick somebody in Narvik before the conquer phase occurs. Here, they don't really get that opportunity. They actually have to do a really concerted effort to get back into Narvik or to get control of the hex. If you don't believe me or you want to contest that, just go check the glossary, and the open port information will kind of list off the situations that apply there. Um, okay, so now let's talk about naval invasions, and this is all going to matter in terms of the decision making of the German player and what they can stop from happening before the second turn. which will really kind of affect um, how things operate, knowing that the Germans get to go first in a given turn. So long as they can make it an untenable situation for the Allies to get into Narvik, they are good, but it costs them as well. So how do you do a naval invasion? It comprises of multiple parts, and depending on how many support markers you have, it gets easier or harder depending on those factors. So first of all, invasions into enemy territory, meaning stuff that you do not own, you can't just simply ship a unit in, requires a beachhead marker. And I guess I'll just show you the Allied one as an example. So here's a beachhead marker. There's a side for one placed by an air unit versus one placed by a ship. Ship tends to be better. Um, and you'll also notice that there's a port icon on this counter. A beachhead marker basically creates a port for you in the place that you're looking to invade. And you might be invading a hex or ultimately aiming to invade a hex that already has a port, but the beachhead marker itself is providing a place for your units to go so that they can continue to try to take that port, take that hex. Now, to place a beachhead marker, you do that with a support marker. You basically take an air unit or a fleet unit. You you use it in the support placement phase, and you earmark a all sea hex, and your opponent has the ability to contest that. So um, you have to overcome your opponent's ability to contest the placement of the fleet or air unit. And if it is placed, then you can decide to exchange functionally that fleet or air marker for the beachhead. So just as an example, we would be saying, hey, we're gonna stick that guy, say right there or something, after getting the fleet. Now that beachhead marker becomes an open port just sort of by default if it's there. If no other conditions apply, it is an open port, which means in the operational phase, so long as you have an appropriate uh, troop convoy, and we'll grab one of those suckers right there, troop convoy, stick that in your North Sea. The North Sea has it's hard to see, focus power. There's a default inherent supply convoy here for the Allies in the North Sea. So the important thing is we're getting a troop convoy so that we can move units. Okay. Now the troop convoy just enables us to have transport capacity. The beachhead marker serves as our destination port when we would seek to ship a unit, and let's say we would ship, maybe this guy, right? And what will happen is he would end up using his operational movement to end up here, right? That's how that works. But to actually do that transportation, you need to have no enemy units in the on station box, because if there are units in the on station box, whether that's subs or fleets, or under some conditions, air units, and that's kind of a special rule. Your air units need to have proper range to be a real problem here. Um, but ships or even subs, if in the on station box, uh, keeps ports from being open. So if we think about this, I mean, even in terms of D-Day, for instance, you need to, one, ensure that you have enough support markers to keep the Axis from deploying their own fleets in the on-station box. You need to clear the hex functionally, or not the hex, but the C zone. Clear the C zone so that your troop convoys are good to go and your beachhead marker can remain an open port. If you do all of these things, that enables you, again, we rebuffed this guy, or we kept him from sticking around, and then we place these other units, so that at least is going to require 1 to 2 ship fleet markers and or air units. You clear it, you clear the on-station box, or you contest the placement, is really what happens. It's not, once they're in the on-station box, they're in the on-station box. So you got to keep them from being there, right? When the German player says, hey, I'm putting my sub The Commonwealth player says, I'm putting my fleet. We move that out of the way. Great. Then they would need another unit to go and become the beachhead marker, or open up the beachhead. So they do that. You operationally move with your troop convoy, a single step unit, to the beachhead. So far, so good, right? Then it matters on a couple of things. If you have a blitz marker, and maybe you'd stick the blitz marker, you know, over here or something along those lines. If you have a blitz marker, then during the blitz combat segment, you can have your unit simply land in the hex if there's no enemy there. So just pop right in. Fantastic. Then, in the reserve movement, you could have them jump right into Narvik. But here's a couple of problems with this whole situation. This is a nice, like, ideal way to try to execute this as the Commonwealth. The real problem is that they don't have a blitz marker, because the cards for the Allies, Commonwealth support, and well, for the dial plan, they'll get a blitz marker. But for these first two turns, they have Commonwealth support, which doesn't have a blitz marker, which means they can't do that. What they can do is that they can land on their beachhead marker. Then in the reserve phase, they can advance one hex that uses all of their movement. And then on the next turn, assuming the Germans haven't done something to stop it, then they can move in. Now, there's different things that we could look to do there, but all of them make this even more difficult. You could shift this down here and have them go here, and that's going to make it really hard for the Germans to actually get a unit up here past this guy. But then this following turn will be mud, and so if we do get a unit adjacent to this guy, he's not going to be able to exit the hex right away. So it's going to be a couple of turns before this guy can, like, safely take Narvik. Now, in the process of having tried to do all of that, in this hypothetical, if we said we were going to do it this way, think about how many markers we need to spend to do this. And the reality is, at the beginning of this scenario, might be different in a campaign, but in this scenario, the Commonwealth has one surface fleet. They do have their convoy marker, so that's really not an issue for them. But they have one air force and they have one surface fleet. And if we try to use both of these to take Narvik, we are giving up a lot of capability in the French campaign. So it's a very tough thing. Like, do we try to make it happen or not? Can we even get in there securely? Well, it requires the Germans not stopping it. And so I should talk about, like, what the Germans would do to keep this from happening, period. That's really the factor here, and how to make sure that you don't really need to worry about Narvik for the rest of the campaign. That's really what it is. It comes down to, like, what else are you doing in this turn? What resources are the Germans going to spend to keep Narvik from even being a concern? But that's still going to cost, resources. Or do they leave it hanging and tempt the British into investing the resources to take Narvik when, you're willing to exchange, one thing or the other because you're getting into Britain? That's kind of the trick here. So just thinking that through again, you got to make sure, one, if the Germans try to block Allied ports, that you stop that from happening. Then you've got to do your own marker placement to create a beachhead, and then you have to spend possibly multiple movement segments getting off the beaches and getting into Narvik itself. Maybe even an incentive to wait until summer to launch the Allied attack on Narvik, in which case you're giving the Germans enough time to stick a unit in Narvik, thus making it damn near impossible for the Allies to make any real headway against a northern Norway invasion. So think about that for a second. Now, me playing solitaire, I can kind of, like, think it through and say, well, if I just did this, I don't need to make any other decisions. I'm just removing that as an option. as the Germans. If I just go do that, I could do that. In a face-to-face game, maybe as the Germans, I would leave that opportunity hanging to tempt the British player into opening themselves up, and I would instead focus my resources on, getting into this area down south to then be in range to launch my attacks on London from the coast here. That would kind of be the way I would do it, I guess, if I were going to do it. And likewise, use the German resources, primarily their air resources, to create the beachheads and try to get into Britain proper. And that's really, I mean, all of that can happen pretty quickly, to jump in and operate that way in this game. So um, that's all. That's like the mental finagling of what makes sense to do here. What would it take for the British to execute it? It's not trivial, and it takes time, and it actually gets easier for the British later because they're going to get access to uh, their CV fleet, their carrier fleet. So while we only have one fleet resource right now to use in the North Sea and for any operations, the Commonwealth will gain better capability to execute later. So if I'm as the German player, and again, I'm playing solitaire, so I kind of have to play a certain way, I can't surprise myself. I might say, hey, before that carrier fleet comes in, let's just lock up Norway. I don't want to have to worry about it. Um, I'm not going to try to get into London anyway. That's sort of the offset, though, to win the campaign. You can afford to lose Norway, or not Norway, but Narvik, if instead you take London. Mathematically, it works out. You still have to take Paris and make sure you have control of Metz and all of that. But that is actually the sort of reaction. If you lose Narvik, you can make up the point by taking London, but you've got to go take London. That's the rub. Um, so all that said, let me take a pause for a second, and we'll talk about how the Germans stop it from happening. And all this is really coming from the help of Mark Hanna and Max to help me understand the options here. So if we reverse time all the way back to the support segment of the first turn, which I guess we haven't gone on the second turn, but if we just went all the way back and said, well, how do we seal the deal on Norway and make sure that we get exactly what we need, and how we want to do it? I guess the first thing that the German player could do is say, hey, by the way, we're going to put our subs out on station. What does that do? Well, it shuts down the ports for the Allies in the North Sea. This would mean that if the Allies wanted to ship units to France to help out, they would have to ship to Brest via the Atlantic Ocean sea area, the North Atlantic, I should say, I guess. Um, so that's an inconvenience to the Allies, uh, but maybe acceptable. It's kind of hard to tell, right? Like, what are you inhibiting right now? Well, you're keeping the Allies from operating well via an open port. It doesn't impact naval or air basing, but it's an inconvenience, right? And what it means is that by deploying our subs this way, we basically shut out the ability for the Commonwealth to have a beachhead and function as a working beachhead for the purposes of getting into Narvik. Now, using up our subs this way is kind of a big commitment, but it does allow us to do that, and it means, for better or for worse, the Allies aren't going to be able to get into Narvik right away. Now, our problem will be maybe we don't get our subs back for a while. As the Commonwealth player, and let's just maybe, because I don't know. I guess I could like roll a die or flip a coin to determine the um, attitude of the British player. But let's just look at this as a for instance here, right? Do I try to stop the subs with one of my markers? Remember, I only have two right now that I can really use. I have an Air Force, I have my ships. Is it worth giving up those capabilities right now or not? If we use them, we can't use them anywhere else. We put everything else at risk. Do we want to, what are the odds we use a marker and we roll a 6 and we don't get our Air Force back? Huge problems, right? If we only get the 2 markers. So, in from this perspective, it would be maybe we let the sub pass, right, as the combo player. Say, fine, I'm going to play defensively. We're going to probably give up on uh, going elsewhere and doing other things. The other thing we would do, this would be at the same time that we're playing our blitz marker over here, clearly, choreographing what we're going to do. We're saying, hey, this is actually a bigger spend for the Germans, honestly, to do this, but say, hey, I'm going to use an Air Force marker, and we're going to put this, out, right? Now, I got to make sure I read the order of operations here. So if we don't, we would put it into a C hex if we were going to turn it into a beachhead. But we're going to put it in the on station box. So what would that do? What does that choreograph? And maybe the order here doesn't matter a huge amount, but sort of where we need to start thinking. Well, now it's a question of like, okay, why am I doing the Air Force in the on station box? It does some of the same things maybe as the subfleet, but it clearly means that we're either being additive there, or we're going to use that unit very likely as an escort. So now it's really sealing the deal. Like, are we going to try to stop this, right? Or are we going to allow the Germans just to get into Narvik or not? Right? That's kind of the real question. At this point, we could contest the air unit with our ships, potentially with our planes as the Commonwealth. But again, by doing that, by trying to get in the way of Narvik or slowing down the Germans getting into Narvik, all we're doing is we're weakening our ability to defend Britain. We're weakening it, right? We make it just that little bit easier for the Germans to later execute their air forces to open up a beachhead and start to affect the game state in Britain proper. Scary stuff. So maybe we would say, as the British, again, based on what I'm seeing come out into the support markers, the Germans are clearly leaning into securing Narvik. So do I bother to try to use my forces to stop them? At this point, I would maybe be thinking, no, we can't afford to, honestly. We can't really afford to spend any more markers. We need to use our chits later and hope the Germans roll poorly for getting their subs back, for getting their planes back, and then we'll use our ships and planes to try to stop the Germans, right? In the grand campaign sense, especially if this were a grand campaign, protecting Britain itself. So we're going to say we're going to let that slide. So now the German player says, okay, I'm going to immediately turn that into a, might be hard to see, escort troop convoy. Okay, so now we have a supply convoy out, we have our troop convoy out. So here's the deal. Once we're done with that, right, everything else is basically in place. We are keeping the British from operating on their turn to successfully place these guys, and then whatever the Commonwealth decides to do next, that'll be up to them. But for now, we're kind of set. So what we do is we play through the turn, right? We do the operational movement. These guys move here. These guys move up to here. In the blitz segment, we do our sneaky thing here, and then in reserve movement, we move these guys over, and keeping in mind that we control the port, right? We control it. It is an open port because we control it, and we have a unit in the port. We can use our troop convoy during reserve movement to move this unit and have them move into honestly, I think it has to be Oslo because the rest of these are not open ports. Um, Somebody mentioned in the comments using Stavanger, but I think you have to use Oslo because every other port is not technically an open port. Um, so during reserve movement, we are uh, placing that and sticking them in here. I guess technically, depending on how you want to look at the orders of operations, um, I guess we could, before we moved that unit in Oslo, we could have put both these units here and moved them. Um, try to think through how that would work, but um, I think if we had moved this unit first in the reserve movement into Oslo, that makes it an open port. Then we would ship this unit directly into Oslo, and I think that's fair and fine. As I think, as far as I can tell, um, for how the port to port movement would work. Um, double checking to make sure. Double checking to make sure. Um, yeah, and these are different movement phases, right? So uh, the the troop convoy, yeah, that doesn't really matter. So we're using the troop convoy of one unit we ship into Oslo. Now that takes up the whole reserve movement of this mountaineer unit, and we still don't control Narvik. But then what we're going to do next, right, is if we go into the next turn, the British do whatever it is they do on their turn, but again, not really able to execute any invasion opportunities in the north. As we get into the next German turn on turn two, what we would end up doing here is sending this guy, basically um, one, two, three, four, and then in the reserve movement, he'll get up to Narvik, and then we'll have basically sealed the deal. There's going to be no point in the British ever really trying to push it any harder than that, and that's where we'll be at. Now, what would get in the way of us completing that move? Well, on turn two, we still need to get supply to Oslo, and we could find ourselves into some trouble with supply. So when we look at the supply rules and tracing uh, a naval zone trace, it has to go from open port to open port. So that is when the British might potentially try to stick something in the um, on the box there for next turn. But if they do, we can still contest that with our own air marker again. Now, I can say, okay, you're used, buddy. But if the so here's the thing, right? We could do that, right? But here's the support math. If the British use their fleet to go on station, or even their plane to go on station, that's now leaving them uh, an opening to where we can contest their placement, and then we could potentially force them to contest our placement of a beachhead in Britain, and they have they have very limited support markers left, and that just maybe makes it easier for us to operate down here. Now, granted, we wouldn't have our air power, so it's kind of this weird, again, this weird situation where we've got to kind of make something happen. Um, Even if this guy can only move in the reserve segment, he can still get pretty far. It's really all about how much effort gets put into messing with Norway, I guess. And if you as a Commonwealth player just says like, dude, I'm not, I don't even care. Um, I'm going to reserve my support markers for defense. Then this gets really easy for the German player to just kind of get in a position and take hold of it. but you might bait them into spending a lot of resources to ensure it works, because at different points in the support marker or contesting back and forth, you're kind of forcing your opponent to take some level of risk, which is a little mini, again, I call it the cup game. Did you put the thing in the cup, or did you leave the cup empty, and revealing the real situation? So are you going to try to contest this? No. Are you forcing your opponent to contest or not contest it? Yes or no? And so I think, just for the sake of the game and following through here, I might say that this is what we do, and we include Narvik for the rest of the series, and just say, like, yeah, the Germans are spending all these resources to make sure to get Narvik. Maybe in an opposed game we wouldn't have to do this. Maybe we wouldn't push so hard to take it for sure. But it's interesting to see it actually play out. So the subs shutting down the invasion vector, using our air power to get an extra unit in there, and then we'll send him up um, on turn two, basically to get all the way up there, assuming that the British don't try on their player turn to be disruptive there. And there's still a good reason to do it. I also say that the other thing is, as soon as if the British were to put their ships on station, again, they lose the opportunity potentially to use it in summer, when the Germans are going to be more likely to go a stomping. Because when we look at, case yellow, we have continued blitz capability. That still continues to make everything over here a very risky proposition for the Allies. So, again, it's like, if you as the British want to use your fleet marker, think about why you're going to use it. What are you going to use it for? Is it doing something useful for you or not? That's the key element. So I think that's it for this video. I just want this to be a standalone discussion of the way all the amphibious invasion stuff works, whether or not it makes sense to execute. Getting that beachhead marker and making sure that you get it and keep it is definitely part of the support marker game. I suspect in the late phases of a campaign where the Allies have a lot of support markers, they're going to out support the Germans and be able to do the big invasions of D-Day and all of that. Probably even quiet times, as you wait for all of your resources to come from the delay box in the turn track, to surge it all in at once and make sure you overwhelm your opponent. I suspect stuff like that can happen. So anyway, that's it for this. We'll see you in the next video, guys, where we'll pick up with the Commonwealth and French response to all of this. I think I am going to keep this game state for Narvik, just so that there's a little more interaction with the whole situation as we go on. And we'll see what else happens. So thanks for watching. Take care. Keep gaming. Let me know your thoughts or anything else I might have missed in the comment section down below. Again, I really appreciate the help there, guys. So yeah, see you later. Take care.